I fear not the dark itself, but what may lurk within it. Welcome to Lurk, bringing you creepy, strange, and bone-chilling stories, with your host, Jamie Jackson.
Hey lurkers, welcome to this week's episode. This week we're heading back to the Haunted Trail and continuing our journey north. For those of you who are new to the podcast, the Haunted Trail is a collection of paranormal stories from along the Appalachian National Scenic Trail. The Appalachian Trail travels 2,190 plus miles through 14 states. That includes Georgia, North Carolina, Tennessee, Virginia, West Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. Traveling the entire length of the Appalachian Trail in one trip is a mammoth undertaking known as a thru hike. Each year, thousands of hikers attempt it, but only 1 in 4 makes it the whole way. A typical thru hiker takes 5 to 7 months to hike the entire AT. The Appalachian Trail is the longest hiking-only footpath in the world, and about 150.8 miles of it goes through the state of Vermont. The area through Vermont ranges from easy to challenging. Because most thru hikers travel south to north, that's how we're moving through these stories. We have already completed Georgia, North Carolina, Tennessee, Virginia, Maryland, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, and Massachusetts. So make sure you check out those episodes if you haven't already. We only have 3 more states left. First up in the state of Vermont is Glastonbury Mountain and the Bennington Triangle. We actually covered this topic in, I think, a couple of episodes. One about the Bennington Monster, which I believe is episode 36, and I think we also covered the Bennington Triangle in general. And I don't remember which episode that is, but certainly look through the episodes and check that out. Even though I did cover a good bit of information, I'm going to touch on some information here just for anybody who is unfamiliar or for those of you who may need a refresher. The area near Bennington, Vermont, on Glastonbury Mountain, is referred to as the Bennington Triangle. It is, of course, a play on the Bermuda Triangle, as the area is known for strange disappearances and strange creatures. Through the years, there have also been numerous UFO sightings in the area of the Bennington Triangle. There have been reports of triangular-shaped craft seen hovering in the skies. The sightings seem to share a few common themes. None of the crafts make noise, and they all have some type of flashing lights. One had lights that flashed and changed color rapidly, and another was listed as having 7 flashing lights. The UFOs were all described as fast-moving. One started out as 2 balls of light that quickly moved and changed into the triangular object. All the witnesses to the sightings said that the objects disappeared very fast, with one saying that the craft shot off into space. Other witnesses have described strange lights in the skies over the mountain that appeared suddenly, moved quickly, and made abrupt direction changes before vanishing instantly. Another witness claimed to have seen a circular light over the mountain that grew larger and brighter before completely disappearing. There's also a description of a dark silver disc object being seen. The object made no noise and had no windows or openings. It too disappeared quickly. There's also a monster lurking in the woods on Glastonbury Mountain and the surrounding areas. But like I said, if you want to hear more on that, you'll need to listen to episode 36. Next up is Stratton Pond. The pond is the largest body of water on the Long Trail. And the Long Trail and the Appalachian Trail are basically the same trail for a good period of time in Vermont. It is the most heavily used location along the Appalachian Trail in Vermont. It boasts spectacular scenery and wildlife, including loons and beavers. There's a bad joke there, but we're going to move on. Legend says that the Stratton Mountain, where Stratton Pond is located, is where Denton McKay first came up with the concept of the Appalachian Trail. Camping is restricted to the designated sites only. Please practice leave no trace ethics, especially disposing of waste properly and traveling and camping on durable surfaces. In Stratton Pond, there's a large rock that sits just off the shore that you can step onto close to the water. It's across the water from where the trail comes into the pond area. I received a story online from some hikers that said when these three individuals entered the area at the pond, they saw a woman standing on the rock. The woman began to sing and made her way from the rock to a patch of ground near the water. She seemed to glow in the moonlight and looked like she was wearing an ankle-length nightgown. She continued singing, but they couldn't make out the words. It was a soft, hauntingly beautiful song. The woman turned around, still singing, and walked back to the forest, though she didn't really walk up the trail. She seemed to glide up the trail. Then she disappeared, and the singing stopped. Continuing further north, you'll come to the town of Manchester Center. Manchester, Vermont is a designated Appalachian Trail community, meaning it offers resupply and hiker-friendly amenities for those on the trail. Though it's located about 5 to 6 miles off the trail, it's a popular spot for hikers to visit. One of the haunted locations is the Equinox Resort. The resort is considered to be one of the most haunted hotels in Vermont. It was completed in 1769 and has a long, rich history that contributes to the paranormal events that take place. One of the most popular stories surrounds President Abraham Lincoln and his family. In 1865, Lincoln's wife, Mary Todd Lincoln, decided to visit the hotel in Vermont because the summers in Washington, D.C. were extremely hot and uncomfortable. He brought along the children that she and the president shared. Unfortunately, disaster struck. Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, changing the family's plans to return to Washington, D.C. Two hotel employees were on the third floor cleaning and performing basic housekeeping duties when they both saw a brief image of what appeared to be Mrs. Lincoln and a small child. The employees saw the apparitions, and then they disappeared as quickly as they appeared. Housekeepers have been afraid to enter certain rooms because of unaccountable noises, rapid changes in air temperature, or things that vanish and appear elsewhere. Housekeepers and security staff witnessed strange things in a certain room on the second floor. Ice chests, chairs, and things that just suddenly appeared in the room were discovered piled up like a pyramid, stacked one on top of the other. Many of the staff reported odd phenomena on the third floor and the south wing, and still others spoke of self-moving furniture. There's long been speculation on the actual identity of the ghost. The possibilities range from Mary Todd Lincoln, wife to Abraham Lincoln, to William Marsh, who owned the original tavern on the site which the Equinox was later built, and George Orvis, son of then Equinox owner Franklin Orvis. George vanished in 1918 when heading out to the property's pond to fish or swim, and he never returned. There have been a number of guests that have experienced unusual and paranormal events. These guests have experienced much of the same thing as the housekeepers of the haunted hotel. Many have experienced voices speaking in a whisper, while others have caught glimpses of full figures from the corners of their eyes. There are some who claim that they feel a quick chill in the air and the hair on their neck and arms stands up. Many have stated that they have had items moved from where they were left in the room, and others have said that the lights have turned on, causing them to wake in the middle of the night. One employee recalled a hotel guest who worked for Guinness Corporation. He went into his room, put his keys on the table, then stepped out for a moment. When he came back, his keys had been separated from the chain and thrown all over the room. The Lincoln family's association with the Manchester area grew with son Robert Todd Lincoln's purchase of neighboring estate Hildene. Employees at the Hildene have allegedly seen ghostly shadows on the third floor of a woman and a child that coincide with descriptions of Mary Todd Lincoln and one of her sons. There is an older tale of hauntings in Manchester, Vermont that happened in April 1819. Not just a haunting, but a little true crime murder mystery as well. The story begins on May 10th of 1812 when Russell Colvin was seen clearing rocks from a field owned by his father-in-law, Barney Bourne. He was in the company of his son Louis and his two brothers-in-law, Stephen and Jesse Bourne. According to some later witness testimony, an argument seemed to be transpiring between Colvin and the two Bournes. Following this, Russell was not seen again in Manchester. He was thought to have wandered off during the altercation, a possibility which the residents of Manchester found perfectly plausible, given that Colvin was considered half-witted and was known to have left town for weeks or months in the past. Then, 7 years after his disappearance, people began to question this assumption. In April of 1819, Amos Bourne, who was Stephen and Jesse's uncle, told of a dream in which the ghost of Russell Colvin stood beside his bed. Colvin's ghost told him that he'd been murdered and that he wanted to show him where his body was buried. The apparition led Amos to a hole in an old cellar in a field that had once belonged to Barney Bourne. This dream occurred 3 separate times in all. Though Amos's dreams were to become one of the major catalysts for the events which followed, it had not appeared entirely out of the blue. A small handful of neighbors and relatives had grown suspicious in recent months because of vaguely sinister comments that had been made offhand by Stephen Bourne. Stephen had moved to Denmark, New York, 2 years earlier, but had returned to Manchester for a visit. Stephen had told an acquaintance that he and Jesse had put Colvin where potatoes would not freeze. Something similar had also been stated or implied by Nathaniel Bourne, another uncle, to Amos in the form of a deathbed confession. It was shortly after this that Amos had his ghostly dreams. Some suggested that the dreams Amos had were fabricated as a way to voice his suspicions about accusing his nephews of murder. When word began to get out about Amos's dreams, others began having, as one source puts it, strange dreams and unaccountable visions. Samuel Putnam Waldo, a lawyer from Hartford, wrote that it seemed as if the age of ghosts and hobgoblins had revived, and that every house was haunted by the ghost of Colvin. And furthermore, that this ghost seemed to have had, if possible, a more serious effect upon the minds of the people than that of the King of Denmark upon Hamlet. I freaking love Hamlet. Just saying. Town officials began to take note and eventually arrested Jesse Bourne. The following day, the investigators headed out to the cellar hole where Amos had been directed in his dream. Digging there produced several small objects: a coat button, 2 knives, a long jackknife and a small penknife. Some bones were found, but these proved not to be human remains. The objects were taken to Russell's wife Sarah, and she identified them as belonging to Russell. It's important to note that Sarah had already voiced an interest in having Russell declared dead, because she had another child who, under Vermont law, was only eligible for support from the father if the mother was unmarried or widowed. With the bones found proving to be of animal origin, the inquiry was left with little besides some refuse from an old cellar hole. In the minds of many, guilt had already been determined, largely on the basis of the spectral dreams of Amos Bourne and the others. By Saturday, May 1st, town officials were prepared to free Jesse Bourne. Then Thomas Jefferson, a local farmer, not the actual president, who claimed to have witnessed the Bournes feuding with Colvin on the day he was last seen, asked to speak with Jesse in his jail cell. What was said is unknown, but when he emerged, Jesse hastily confessed that he believed Stephen may have killed Colvin. He added that he thought he had an idea within a few rods of where Colvin was buried. This revelation led to a new search which revealed nothing. In another part of Manchester, a boy discovered bones in the hollow of an old stump. This generated a great deal of excitement. Once more, upon close examination, these too appeared to be animal bones. But with Jesse's statement in hand, finding the body was no longer as important. Men were sent to New York to arrest Stephen Bourne and bring him to Manchester. He came willingly enough, but claimed his innocence when pressed to confess the murder. Once back in Manchester, Stephen was first placed in a separate cell. Then, hoping that putting the two together would provoke a full admission, he was moved in a cell with Jesse. Having quite the opposite of the desired effect, Jesse promptly rescinded his earlier statement. The people were enraged. Amos Bourne's dreams were accepted as confirmation strong as Holy Writ, according to a source. The town officials close to the case knew that the case against the brothers was far from perfect. What followed then, over the course of the long summer they spent sitting in their cell, was that virtually everyone involved took a turn at badgering, cajoling, and even threatening the brothers into a full confession. After what some sources called coercion, Stephen offered a confession that he had in fact killed Colvin. In his account, however, Jesse was not even present, leading later scholars to wonder if he may have just been trying to secure the release of his brother. He later tried to retract his confession, as Jesse did with his, but it was too late. The trial for murder, at least the official one, was carried out in October of 1819. The Bournes were convicted and sentenced to death. The sentence seemed particularly severe, especially in Jesse's case, and is an indicator of how intense the anti-Bourne sentiment had become. Bourne's attorneys circulated a petition for clemency. At the same time, a novel idea occurred to them. What if Russell Colvin was really alive and could be found? So they purchased advertisements and papers throughout the Northeast, seeking information from anyone along with a detailed description. It went out about 2 months before the brothers were due to be hanged. As the weeks passed, it eventually made its way to New York, where it was seen by two crucial individuals. One was Tabor Chadwick, a visiting Methodist minister from New Jersey, who, after mulling it over a few days, wrote to the newspaper that he believed he knew the man in question and that he was alive and well in New Jersey. The second, as fate would have it, was a former resident of Manchester and a New York City tavern owner by the name of James Welpy. When he saw Chadwick's letter, he found the preacher, who told him that the man he believed to be Colvin worked for his brother-in-law, William Polumus. Welpy hired a wagon and made haste to Polumus's mill in New Jersey. When he found Polumus, he was told that he did have a man from Vermont working for him, who had originally given his name as Russell Colvin before changing it, and that this man was mildly deranged, which would mean slow in today's terminology. Welpy met the man, and he knew at once that this was indeed Colvin. Securing Polumus's permission, Welpy took Colvin by stagecoach to Vermont. They arrived in Bennington on December 22nd to great crowds of spectators. Though somewhat confused, Russell addressed several people he knew there by name. All in Bennington were unanimous. This was indeed the man thought dead, standing before their very eyes. Word reached Manchester, and it was met with great skepticism. Stephen Bourne seemed the most shocked of all, declaring that if Colvin made his appearance right then, it would have caused immediate death. When Russell Colvin did arrive, he was greeted by a mob. Nearly every man, woman, and child in town had come to see this man who had returned from the dead. Colvin greeted all he knew immediately by name and seemed confused by all the fuss. When Stephen was allowed to make his way through the crowd, Colvin stared at him, finally asking why he was in chains. "Because they say I murdered you," Stephen replied. "You never hurt me," said Colvin. "Jesse struck me with a briar once, but it did not hurt me much." Colvin stayed in town for a week, during which time nearly everyone from Manchester, as well as people from neighboring towns, stopped to speak to him. All were convinced that both in appearance and behavior, this was indeed the missing man. Even his wife Sally knew him, though he was cold and aloof at her visit, and said to have muttered, "That's all over with." For legal purposes, he was asked to undergo an official examination to definitively prove his identity. The examination, run by the state's attorney who had prosecuted the Bournes, went smoothly and without incident. According to Leonard Sargent, Colvin told so many little incidents that could not have been known to an impostor. However, well posted that there could be no doubt in the mind of any rational person as to the identity of the man. On December 29th, Colvin left Manchester for the last time. He made final appearance in Albany before returning to New Jersey, at which point he became lost to history. What may have become of him after this is totally unknown. Stephen and Jesse were, of course, released. Both of them sued the state for damages, and they lost. Stephen returned to New York, and Jesse moved to Ohio. Ever since then, the case is held up as a classic case of wrongful conviction due to community prejudice and superstition. But was it? UMass historian Gerald McFarland makes a case for the possibility that Russell Colvin, which appeared in Manchester in December of 1819, was actually a paid impostor. The basis for his argument, however, seems even more circumstantial than the evidence which convicted the Bournes to begin with. In the end, it seems we're left with a persistent shroud of mystery over the whole affair. Was it really Russell Colvin who appeared at the last moment in Manchester, or was it indeed all a con to save the Bournes from the gallows? Or was it, in fact, Colvin's ghost, having now forgiven each his own death, sweeping through town for one last, incredible finale? And then, of course, there is the 1973 case of a vampire. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, there are vampires in Vermont. In 1989, Captain Isaac Burton married a woman by the name of Rachel Harris, who fell ill and died a year later of consumption. That's better known today as tuberculosis. Not long after, Burton married Huldah Powell, who quickly showed signs of the illness. In 1793, as Huldah grew sicker, Burton's family and close friends decided to take action to save his second wife. The obvious answer was that Rachel had been a vampire, whose spirit was sucking the life out of Huldah. At least that's what they thought back then. Next time I get a cold, I'm going to tell my husband his ex-wife is sucking out my soul. It's not nice. I shouldn't say that. In several areas of New England, including Manchester, it was believed that if someone was deemed a vampire, exhuming their remains and burning certain vital organs would help cure those who were being affected by the dead vampire. If Rachel the vampire was dealt with appropriately, the thought was that this would save Huldah. According to eyewitness accounts, on a frigid February morning in 1793, an unruly crowd headed to Rachel's grave. They dug it up, removed what remained of her heart, liver, and lungs, and burned them on the blacksmith's forge. They believed they had slayed the demon, but it didn't save Huldah, who died soon after. These types of vampire spirit-slaying rituals continued in New England right up to 1891, until public backlash and outrage against them finally put a stop to it. The next town is the town of Wallingford. The town of Wallingford is located in the Otter Creek Valley along Route 7 between the Taconic and Green Mountain Ranges, 22 miles north of Manchester and 10 miles south of Rutland. According to local lore, Wallingford Sugar Hill was where maple syrup was first made in Vermont. Before the industrialization of the town, a skeleton of a man was dug up behind an old stone shop on Main Street. The remains of a rusted gun barrel was also found. The remains were thought to be of a soldier from the French and Indian War, but the cause of death was never known. The Appalachian Trail actually runs through Wallingford, Vermont, passing through the Robert T. Stafford White Rocks National Recreation Area. Perhaps the most mysterious area of town is the unforgiving and conspicuous geographical anomaly that can be seen from all parts of town, an area that is called White Rocks. White Rocks Mountain showcases glacial history, erosion, and climate variation. The mountain's elevation, around 2,600 to 2,680 feet, places it in a region of significant natural beauty and geological interest. The ice beds, with their persistent ice and cooler microclimate, make this area a compelling subject for both scientific study and recreational exploration. According to an obscure local lore, the White Rocks are said to be the final resting place of a treasure lost over 2 centuries ago. Sometime during the late 1700s, a group of Spanish prospectors passed through the area, now known as Wallingford, seeking fortune. They discovered a rich vein of silver in the mountains. The group began to set up mining operations and began to dig deep cavities at the base of the mountain. They were able to work in secret, smelting the ore and turning it into silver coin. Eventually, they decided that they had enough to live comfortably for the rest of their lives, but they had no way to transport all of their newly found wealth back to Spain. They filled their saddlebags with what they could and hid the rest in the mine. The opening of the mine was hard to find, and they all agreed that it would be highly unlikely that another prospector or woodsman would stumble upon it. But just in case, they disguised the opening, with the hopes of coming back whenever they wanted if they needed more money. Years passed, and most of the original group had died off, except one. An old man now, he wandered onto the streets of Chester, Vermont, looking tired and a little confused. A young local man noticed his appearance and asked the old man if he was all right and if he needed assistance. The Spaniard was apparently so grateful at this person's generosity that he decided to return the favor. The Spaniard told his new friend, Richard Lawrence, that his saddlebags were filled with silver coins, and told him about the mine in Wallingford. He informed Richard that whatever treasure was left in the mine was his to keep, on the condition that he waited until he passed away to go claim it. Richard proved to be just as honest as the old man had predicted, and he didn't tell anyone about the treasure until years later, when he told a few of his good friends and decided to set out to Wallingford and the mysterious White Rocks. But after an organized search, they could not find the opening of the cave. Search efforts carried on for several months, but after hours of work, they reluctantly gave up. Today, the treasure has yet to be found, and the mountains still remain as elusive and mysterious. If you believe that a buried treasure still exists, don't plan on digging for it. The White Rocks is protected land, part of the White Rocks National Recreation Area within the Green Mountain National Forest. Above Wallingford, the Long Trail travels north over the peaks of southern Vermont's Green Mountains, dips down and back up the steep gulf around Route 140, and descends into a desolate area called Patch Hollow. Running in a north-south direction, Patch Hollow is a deep trench of land high in the Green Mountains, formed by the steep slope of Bear Mountain to the west and the more gentle Button Hill to the east. In the center of this densely wooded trench is a large swamp. A settlement of at least 5 families once made their home here. On May 11, 1831, one of the settlements in the hollow was owned by Roland Wheeler. Wheeler was a man of violent passions and jealous disposition. He was also guilty of sexual acts with his wife's sister, and when word of that got out, people were not real happy about it. It created a lot of tension and resentment throughout the settlement, and the residents ended up forming a mob to tar and feather Wheeler. But Wheeler was warned about the approaching mob, so he fashioned a knife from a large file and bolted his door. Equipped with jugs of rum, a bucket of tar, and a sack of feathers, both parties made their way into the mountains. The party from nearby Shrewsbury never made it, getting lost in the woods instead. Their pride was damaged, the reality of getting lost overpowered the want for vigilante justice, and that group returned home. But the Wallingford mob made it to the house and forced their way inside. They eventually forced their way in by prying a hole in the gable end of the roof. 3 men leaped into the house and struggled with Wheeler in the dark. Wheeler stabbed one man in the side, and another was slashed an excessive amount of 14 times. The door to the cabin was unbarred, and more people poured into the cabin. In the scuffle, someone was killed. The angry mob stopped being belligerent and went to get a better look at their prize. But in the chaos, they had made a fatal mistake. They killed group member and their friend, Isaac Osborne. Wheeler was nowhere to be found. Wheeler had escaped the hands of one of his attackers by wrestling out of his clothes, crawling under his bed, and prying up some floorboards before escaping beneath the house. The mob panicked, most likely all scared because they committed murder that night, and hastily fled. Later, Dr. John Fox of Wallingford would visit the scene, which he recounted as the most terrible sight he could recall. By the light of a candle, Fox saw the livid body of Osborne on the bed and cabin literally soaked in blood. After escaping his house, Wheeler decided that spending the night naked in the woods was a safer option than venturing back into town. Before dawn, he stole a shirt from a clothesline, walked to the Hartsboro section of town, and hid in a barn. Needing clothes, he spent part of the day crudely weaving a dress from rye straw he found in the barn, and then retreated to his sister's home in Paulet. After all that, Wheeler was finally caught. He was arrested and put on trial in a makeshift court. In the end, he was found innocent under terms of self-defense. The mob who assaulted him didn't get off so easily. 2 of his attackers were fined $60 each, while 3 others were fined $40. Justice was served, just not in the way the angry mob expected. Soon after, Patch Hollow was abandoned, at least by the living. Some say that you can still hear the sounds of the angry mob storming the house, and some have claimed to have seen the ghost of Isaac Osborne wandering the area. Up next is Killington Peak. It is the second highest summit in the Green Mountains and in the U.S. state of Vermont. It's located east of Rutland and is a stop on the Long Trail, which here shares its route with the Appalachian Trail. The Reverend Samuel Peters claimed to have christened the state Vermont by smashing a bottle of whiskey at the top of Killington Peak. When the state was named Vermont, Reverend Peters was angered, saying that the name translated into Maggot Mountain. His ghost still sits up on Killington Peak, and in the summer he preaches to any visitors silly enough to come within hearing distance. "It's not Maggot Mountain, it's Green Mountain," he rants. It's said that it's best to try to avoid his angry ghost. Further along the trail is the town of West Hartford, an unincorporated community village in the town of Hartford, Vermont. It's one of Hartford's 5 villages situated on the White River and crossed by the Appalachian Trail. On February 5, 1887, Vermont experienced the worst train disaster in the state's history. The rear sleeper car of the Montreal Express hit a broken rail and plunged off the Woodstock Bridge, taking 3 other cars with it. The coupling broke and saved the remaining cars from the same fate. When the cars struck the water below, they burst into flames and burned the bridge. A total of 37 people were killed. There are a couple of ghosts that now roam the area. There's a young boy that seems to stare at the area where the crash occurred. It's said he witnessed his father die in the crash, and now his ghost relives the moment over and over again. The conductor is also seen patrolling the rails in the area, hoping to prevent another disaster. There's also a nearby barn that was used as a makeshift hospital for the injured and dying. In the area of the barn, you can hear disembodied crying. Throughout the entire state of Vermont, there's a phenomenon known as the phantom loggers. Logging was a booming business in the late 1800s to the early 1900s. It was also a deadly business. Men often died. Some died from drowning, some were crushed between logs, and sometimes, while trying to free up a log jam, they ended up being crushed or carried away in the current. Today, phantom loggers are seen floating down the river. There are also shadow figures seen on the trail that are thought to be the apparition of those loggers lost on the job, still trying to carry out their work. And that's going to do it for this episode. Remember, you can find Lurk wherever it is that you find all of your other podcasts, like Spotify and iHeartRadio or Apple Podcasts. You can also find podcast episodes at the website lurkpodcast.com. And there we also have a blog. We have a place for you to sign up for the newsletter. And we have a news section which will be featuring guest co hosts and other team members of the podcast. So far, it features myself and Liz, who was on our eyeball killer episode. I need to get working on that. If you like what you hear, tell your friends, tell your enemies, tell your bus driver, tell whoever it is that you know. If you have a minute, give us a 5-star review. And until next time, keep lurking.